This week on the BackTable podcast.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest travesties of the system as it is the fact that whenever there is a medical error and then there's a lawsuit that's filed, the first thing that all our risk managers or everyone who's in the business will do is just say, circle the wagons, clamor down, let's not talk. When the most important thing is that doctor-patient relationship. That's the saving grace that you can really use to reestablish that connection and say, look, this is what happened. And that's sort of one of the reasons we decided to highlight the communication resolution programs, is because it allows you to sort of leverage that clinical relationship and say, hey, this is what happened.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the BackTable Innovation Podcast. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and on backtable.com. This is our next installment in the BackTable Innovation Show, where you will hear stories from physician entrepreneurs who are helping to drive healthcare forward through medtech innovation. Today I've got a very special episode with Viknesh Kasthuri. Viknesh, first off, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, Viknesh. Yeah, Kasthuri.
Okay, all right, cool. Viknesh is a fourth-year medicine at Brown. He recently released a documentary titled A World of Hurt, How Medical Malpractice Fails Everyone. It is very well done. I highly recommend anybody who's listening, as soon as you're done with listening to this, go to YouTube, type in A World of Hurt, and watch it. It's 25 minutes long, Viknesh?
Yeah, 26:46, yeah.
Yeah. I just watched it for the third time before we started because I was like, I gotta refresh, my memory about just really well told stories to contribute, and we'll dive into that here in a minute. The documentary covers basically our broken medical malpractice system. Welcome, Viknesh, to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of BackTable. I've used it to prep for all my rotations, so kind of full circle to be able to come on here and share a little bit about the film.
Yeah, well, I'm very impressed with how you put that together, and I have got a lot of questions about that. But first, the person who told me about it was, so Geeta Pensa, as you know, has been on the show, right? And she's featured in the film. So she's been on our show a couple times. For those who haven't listened to her episodes, she was on episode 177 on the VI show and episode 90 on the ENT show. So Geeta has told her story about her, going through that in detail on the podcast, but she was also featured in this documentary. So I have a feeling she has something to do with the story behind what led you to create this film, but I want you to tell us about the story behind what led you to create it.
Sure. So I think there's a couple different sources of inspiration for the film. The first is Alex and I. Alex is one of the co-directors on the film. We made a podcast, not as illustrious as BackTable, of course, but it was called Back of the Chart. And we would bring in doctor-patient dyads. We'd email doctors, say, hey, would you be able to bring in a patient who reminds you of why you got into medicine, or, would be your favorite patient, and talk about what made that relationship work. And so as learning to do the podcasting craft, we took a course from Dr. Pensa, and at that time she was producing and releasing the L Word, and we got to hear clips from there, and sort of we did 2 seasons of that podcast, and one of the things that really struck us was all the things outside of medicine that affected the provision of care. One of those things is the sword of Damocles that hangs over every physician: medical malpractice, the fear of being sued. And then finally, I wrote my undergraduate thesis on medical malpractice. And so all those sorts of things came together. And so in the fall of 2019, right as COVID was taking off, we reached out to Dr. Pensa and said, we'd be interested in doing a film about medical malpractice. We have the storytelling chops a little bit from the podcast. Alex and I were both really into photography. And so we thought we could sort of meld those interests and abilities together and tell, a story that is very taboo. There is really no documentary out there about the medical malpractice system. There's documentaries about specific errors, but nothing really about the medical malpractice system, how it fails doctors, how it fails patients, and what a better way might look like. And so that's why we sort of wanted to put the film together.
And is your co-director, is he in medical school as well?
Yeah. Alex is also a medical student.
Is he in your class?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Alex and I are both in the 8-year BSMD program at Brown. And so we met in undergrad and have done a couple of projects together.
So had you ever, did you do a rotation with Geeta, or you just heard her podcast and discovered she was at Brown as well?
We knew that she was doing this preclinical elective for medical students and sort of undergraduate students in the program as well about podcasting. And so we signed up for that course. And as part of that, we produced an episode of the podcast, and we wanted to produce a couple seasons of the podcast as well. So that's how we got in contact. And then later she was a huge resource for putting this film together.
And so had you, I mean, it's exceptionally well done. Had you said you've done podcasting before, but had you put together an actual documentary before in undergrad?
No, and so I neglected to mention Dr. Mark Brady. So when we reached out to Dr. Pensa about this, she said, who you should talk to is Dr. Mark Brady. He's a PD in emergency medicine at Tennessee at Memphis. He started the EM residency program there. He's made several documentaries himself, one of which he was just finishing up was the New York Times op-doc, Dying in Your Mother's Arms, that later went on to be nominated for an Emmy. And so he was looking for his next project. And one of the things he was interested in, of course, being an emergency medicine physician, was medical malpractice. And it sort of happened to be serendipity that we were able to be connected. And he was a huge mentor for us and sort of putting together, EP'd the film as well. And so it's very much a group effort. And we couldn't have done it, without all the support, not only of folks at Brown, but all the people who are so generous to share their stories.
Absolutely. And for those who haven't listened yet, I mean, these are incredible stories being told. And I imagine there's so many pieces to putting a documentary to like this together, even a 25-minute one. Where do you start? Like once you're like, okay, we got the team, we got the sort of like idea in place, where did you start researching which stories you're going to tell?
Yeah, a lot of it's sort of banging your head against walls, right? For lack of a better term. We started this in the fall of 2019. Our first interview with Dr. Pensa, this was sort of when the COVID was starting. So we were shooting socially distanced on long lenses to keep 6 feet distance from being tested, every week to make sure we could go and do this. And so she connected us to a couple people, and you sort of just snowball your way from there and try to find people. And we've basically found one story every year. We were working on this, as much as we could in between classes and med school, and it took us about a year to find every case. And we have 3 cases. And so the first one was based out of Washington. It happened to be not too far from my hometown. I'm from Southeastern Washington. And that's Dr. Seaman's case, Matt Seaman. And we talked to his widow, Dr. Linda Seaman, about his experience going through that case. And so that was the first thing. We flew into my small hometown airport. Alex flew in as well. We had, 2 Pelican cases of a year that Dr. Brady had. I had this camera that I'm filming on right now as well. And we sort of went on a little road trip of Washington. We interviewed Linda Seaman. We went and interviewed some of Matt Seaman's colleagues in other parts of Washington. And we sort of did like a couple-day road trip of Washington. It's very much a passion project. There's no funding out here. It's very hard to find funding for these things, especially for an inside baseball story like medical malpractice. So it's very much a passion project. We only got funding when we got to the editing stage. And so, we had put together a trailer, a short sample of what some of the highlights of the footage might be, showed it to the Rhode Island Medical Society, and they were very kind enough to give us a grant to have this professionally edited.
Okay, so you had the raw footage, and then you were like, okay, let's put this in the hands of professionals for the editing part.
Right, yeah. It's not sort of, you can sort of send it off. A lot of it's sort of a very collaborative effort over several months of being like, this is what we see for the film. Is this something that's feasible? What are some ways to make this happen? And the thing about film that is different from podcasting is not only do you have to have the audio right, but people have to provide it in a way that's compelling on camera. It's very hard to edit out a lot of the stutters in a way that, you could in podcasting. If someone says, it's really easy to slice that out in podcasting and Audition. Whereas, on film, you see that judder and you have to switch cameras, and there's different ways to get around it. So a lot of I guess we can talk more about the interviewing process for documentary, how it might differ from podcasting, but a lot of that's sort of getting people to try to give it again in a short take that will play well on camera, sound good as a soundbite. So I think sort of there's an additional wrinkle when you think about documentary filmmaking compared to podcasting that was very exciting for us.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I mentioned at the beginning, like I created a small, like a very short documentary about alcohol abuse in med school. I think it was like my second year. It was over the course of a summer, and it involved a series of interviews. And you're absolutely right. And what I was most impressed by was, especially now you're telling me that you and Alex, flew out there and you filmed everything yourself. Where did you learn how to do this? Because, as you know, there's all these little pieces that make it look professional, which you guys did. How did you learn that?
Yeah, I think Alex and I are both gearheads, and we spend a lot of time on YouTube rabbit hole learning about how to use gear. Maybe that's something you can really do as well. But, a lot of things from photography in terms of composition, in terms of lighting, those things do carry over. And then a lot of the interviewing stuff is, I think, things you learn from medicine or carry over from medicine of how do you sort of take a patient interview, how do you lead people down that path, how do you prepare for that, and so those are the things sort of come together. And lastly, it's like trial and error. So you can see as we get more experience doing it, the shots look a little bit better, the audio is a little bit better. So you might be able to pick up a little bit of that at the film. But Dr. Brady was so kind in sort of instructing us on how to approach this. We shot Dr. Pence's interview with him, and he taught us a lot of the ropes and lent us a lot of the gear to make that happen. So also very, very lucky to have incredible mentors like him.
A lot of it was not just the interviews and the filming in person, but also the retrospective stuff, the historical pieces that were pulled. How did you guys research? Did you have a team to help research that, or did you and Alex do that all yourselves?
Yeah, it's not a big production. It's just me, Alex, Dr. Brady, three of us, and then we recruited friends and family as needed to serve as stand-in for B-roll or to help hold the mic if this was in town, or if it wasn't, we'd fly out and we'd just do it all ourselves. So all of it was just sort of us bird dogging a lot of this. We were very lucky to find lawyers who were willing to work with us for both the Barnes's case and for Megan's case. We found these attorneys in Michigan who were very, very willing to help us. They gave us all sort of the deposition footage. They connected us to the cases. And so we're also very grateful to them for being so open with that. It's interesting when we went through the process of trying to find cases, so many times people would be like, oh, this sounds amazing. I know X, Y, and Z cases. And then what would happen is they would think about it and they said, sorry, I can't do that. I'm sorry. There's just like legally not the best look for us. So a lot of dead ends. And then even when we're trying to find a case to illustrate the communication resolution programs, those CRP programs that we highlight in the film, we found this one case and the hospital sort of had released a video about these folks. So we said if they've gone public with their story, it'd be great to get them on camera. And we were about to buy plane tickets to go see them. And then the CEO of the hospital basically vetoed it and said, no, we don't feel comfortable with independent documentary production talking about this case. So it goes to show even in those places where so many steps have been made to approach medical error in a way from a medical approach rather than a legal approach and to do all these sorts of things, there's still a lot of taboo around the topic and a lot of hesitancy about talking about it. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, do you think that was like the biggest challenge of putting this together is just getting that honesty from, you captured three really profound stories, but I imagine that was, how many stories did you have to hear to whittle it down to just three?
Yeah, I think we probably sent up like 20 Zoom interviews to pre-interview people and get a sense of whatnot. But in a lot of ways, beggars can't be choosers. And we were really lucky that the stories we found were so profound and people were so willing to open up on camera. It's one of those things that maybe you've noticed as well. Podcasting is for the first 30 minutes, guests are, very much holding their cards to their chest. They're shielded. And then 30 minutes in, people sort of start to open up. And you sort of see that on film as well. Sometimes what, you would notice, even 30 minutes in, you have to swap out batteries, swap out memory cards. You'd hit the pause button, they would hear the camera go off, and then they would like relax and they would tell you all the most profound things. And you're like, oh man, if only that was on camera. So one of those things, of course, that's part of the craft of documentary filmmaking is trying to get people to be comfortable on camera and sort of really open up. And I think that just sort of comes with time as you build rapport on camera. People are willing to open up and they understand that, you really want to hear their story.
Yeah, you're right. It is commonplace. And a lot of times what happens, a lot of our hosts will grumble, like they'll stop recording and then they'll keep talking because they're just interested in what, whatever the topic is. And some of the best stuff comes afterwards when you've stopped. And it's so true. And because some people are like, oh, you should have like short format content, like just do 10-minute episodes. But it takes 10 minutes for people to even just get into to just get over the awkwardness, of like being on, like you said, on record. Here we are, we're like 20 minutes in and, finally we're kind of settling into the conversation, but it's that whole introduction. You might even cut all that out, right? But you have to get through, you have to experience it. You have to get through it before you get to the good stuff. Wouldn't you say?
Certainly. Yeah. We saw this in podcasting, saw this on the documentary, in order to get a 26-minute production, we probably had an order of like 20 or 30 hours of footage.
Wow.
And sort of whittling that down because not everything's a winner. And then what happens is the editor will do like cuts of each storyline and put them together. And then you have the really difficult job of going through and killing your babies, right?
Yeah.
And try to will that down. And so we got it down to 30 minutes. We sent that on the film festival circuit. It went to, I think, 26 film festivals. Won a couple
amazing.
awards. And then when PBS agreed to take it on, we had to cut it further down. 26, 46 is sort of their length. So they have like ad time and whatnot. So that's sort of the process of whittling that film down. I think it became stronger as it became shorter because you have a greater sense of exactly what you want to say in the film. What are the most important parts of the message? And then sometimes you said, no, this really didn't work. You see audiences, you watch audiences while they watch the film. What hit, what didn't hit? Oh, people keep getting confused here. I wonder if you remember that thing that person said way back in the day. Do you think that would work here? And then you try that, and then, you go back and forth. And so we're very happy with the way the film turned out. I'm very happy that we were able to go through that process.
What a fun creative process, but at the same time, like you said, like beating your head against the wall because you're like you said, it just you're feeling you're making sacrifices where you're cutting out stuff that you find important, but like you said, maybe the audience doesn't, and that is challenging. Did you ever? Sometimes we've had that happen, very rarely, where a guest says, "Hey, I noticed you cut this part out. Why'd you do that?" Did you guys have any issues with that?
No, not in particular. I think there's so many things that were left on the cutting floor that we would have loved to keep in. And one of the things, and especially when you're covering something medical, is there's this huge impulse on the side of healthcare providers looking at this, of trying to, do their own deduction as to what happened and would have got it, would have not. And one of the decisions we had to make in the film is say, that's sort of besides the point. What we're trying to do is highlight the way the system addresses these errors, not whether or not you would have gotten these errors right or not. And so that was one of the things where you'll notice we cut out a lot of the medical stuff. One, because it's aimed at a lay audience, but also because we don't want people to sort of focus on trying to solve the case for themselves rather than looking at what we're trying to say about the system as a whole, which is that it's broken.
I think that's smart. And that I got caught up in that too. And I think that one of the sort of like cringiest parts of it for me as a radiologist, both as a diagnostic and interventional radiologist, is, the head CT miss, right? And you're just like, oh my God, it's so gut wrenching. Because it could happen to anybody. And that guy just had a stack of cases and he's just, because of the necessity of the speed at which you have to read those cases, it was just an unlucky miss, not to take away from his skill or ability. And hearing his testimony, you guys did a perfect job of just that little bit of testimony showing his remorse. Like, look, I lost a lot of sleep over this. And that's what the family wants to hear for sure, and the patients want to hear is that the doctors do feel remorse, because if they don't get that, then then they feel like that person, that physician, that miss, that's a monster. They can create that in their heads. I imagine, having got my own family gone through things and seen that, where you're looking to assign blame to something or somebody, right? And that's the whole mental piece of it. And that's why the whole point you're proving is like, this doesn't serve anybody. One of the other bone-chilling parts of it was for the sister of Megan, who was saying basically, it was almost like she was expecting that those physicians would not practice anymore, which I think is, I could see that viewpoint, but also unfair to those physicians, because they are also at the same time saving lives every single day. They had a mistake, right? Which humans make. And so that to me was really tough to hear, but I also understand.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest travesties of the system as it is the fact that whenever there is a medical error and then there's a lawsuit that's filed, the first thing that all our risk managers or everyone who's in the business will do is just say, circle the wagons, clamor down, let's not talk. When the most important thing is that doctor-patient relationship, right? That's the saving grace that you can really use to reestablish that connection and say, look, this is what happened. And that's sort of one of the reasons we decided to highlight the communication resolution programs, is because it allows you to sort of leverage that clinical relationship and say, hey, this is what happened. And, that's one of the biggest, why do patients sue, right? Like, they want to know what happened. No one tells them what happens. Everyone clamors down, no one knows what happens. Second is, if something bad happened, they want compensation, and they want to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. There's the sense that what happened to their loved one shouldn't happen to anyone else. And so these communication resolution programs, they allow you to address that because, they bring in their lawyer, you have a very honest conversation as to what happened. And, do we stand by this care? Do we not? Either way, we're going to let you know what happened. If we don't stand by this care, we're going to offer you a settlement, some sort of compensation. And we can do that way quicker than we can if we go through the legal process, drag this out for 8 years, at which time the compensation might not be as high yield. And then finally, people get a sense of what it is that the system's going to do to make sure that doesn't happen again. So it addresses all those points, and it uses the medical system rather than the legal system to do that. So that's one of the reasons why we chose to highlight the communication resolution programs in the film.
Yeah, that was very smart, because literally all three stories are really profound and teach you something. And it was the third one with the couple with the baby, right? What I loved about that story was that they did get some resolution because they got to meet the physician afterwards and hug it out and cry together. And I think it helps, to me, from the patient perspective, it helps to realize that physician is also hurting, right? Because from the physician perspective, like you said, we're actually, walls are put up as soon as there's any kind of, even talk about legal action. Walls are put up and we're not allowed to communicate. And I don't think the patients realize that. And they don't realize how much the physicians are hurting on our side. And so to be able to experience that together so that the physician feels better about what happened, talking to the parents of that child that died, that to me was really impactful. And if only there was a pathway for that, but there's not, right? I don't know how that unfolded, how that happened, but like I would say most of the time from what I've heard is you are not allowed to speak to the patients whatsoever.
Right. And I think there's something we put in the film where the lawyer Rick Boothman, who came up with the Michigan model, these communication resolution programs, he says, I realized we weren't learning anything from this. And then one time, my physician won and the plaintiff came over and said, if I had known what I learned during this trial, I wouldn't have sued, or something along those lines.
That's right.
And
yeah.
And it just goes to show how broken the system is. And I want to touch on your point about, physicians are hurting. Like the litigation stress is so real. We see it in Dr. Seaman's case. What a tragic story, right? And there's also several other tragedies, small tragedies occurring every time, doctor gets sued because people are so isolated, right? You said, don't talk about it, right? So people say, don't talk about it. And so relationships suffer, your work performance suffers. And so there's a lot of resources out there. I want people to know there's a lot of resources out there for taking care of you, both in the setting of litigation stress, but also generally, right? We need to do a way better job about mental health. And that's like a whole, different conversation I think you all have talked about in previous episodes, but we need to do a much better job in sort of taking care of physicians. And I think the last thing around there is we need to do a better job in teaching trainees. And no one gets much education about this because it's such a taboo topic. And I remember when Alex and I matriculated to med school, we met with the dean and said, hey, would there be a role for medical malpractice education? And one of the responses we got was, well, we don't want to scare people. We don't want to scare people. And I just couldn't believe that that was the approach, because we don't take that approach to anything else in medicine. We don't say, strokes are really scary. We're not going to talk about it in med school. Heart attacks are super scary. We're not going to talk about it in med school. But for some reason, when it comes to this taboo topic of medical malpractice, we're more than willing to sweep it under the rug. And I think that's something that needs to change. And what's one of the things we're hoping to do in sort of taking this film on grand rounds and putting it on PBS, and is to raise awareness with the public, but also within the profession as to, we need to do something about this and sort of set trainees up for success. Because no matter if you're a good doctor or a bad doctor, whatever the heck that means, people are going to get sued. So
yeah, absolutely. And bad things are going to happen. And, physicians are humans and they're going to make mistakes, and people are sick is the other thing. People are sick, and sometimes it has nothing to do with the physician or the care they received, but they want somebody to own that demise, right? Or that bad outcome. And so a couple of things on what you just said. Like, one is, the fact that they're not incorporating this kind of stuff into med school curriculum, I think is really a shame. I feel the same way about AI. I feel the same way about business of medicine. When I talk to med students like yourself, like, I'm still shocked that there's no incorporation of any aspect of business of medicine, or even about the U.S. healthcare system, right? It might vary depending on the med school, but in ours, there was zero. For radiology specific malpractices or anything else that's incorporating AI, I'm like, why are you not teaching the residents about AI, right? And malpractice is not any different. I mean, we got a little bit by certain attendings who admittedly was probably practicing defensive medicine, but they at least taught us about, what to look out for along the way in terms of language, in terms of like, if you do get sued, these are the, the resources you have. These are it was more kind of like cautionary tales, right? But I do think that that's helpful, and it should be standardized as part of a curriculum and not just kind of anecdotal and, here and there.
Yeah, we were able to put together a little preclinical elective for medical students based off of, we got all the transcripts from Megan's case, and so we were able to do sort of a role play trial, and we got lawyers to serve on the jury, and so I think students got an opportunity to experience that. And of course, we had lectures from people like Dr. Pensa and lawyers and plaintiffs and defense attorneys and all that. So I think there's a lot of room for growth, and our hope is that we can sort of facilitate that, or at least get the conversation started with the film.
And that's at Brown?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And have you had any success like replicating that with other schools or any other med students that you've talked to like try and push that at their schools?
We'd love to. If you're interested, please reach out.
Yeah.
We'd love to make that happen. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that seems like something that you guys could create even a course, and even if it's virtual, put it out there on Coursera or something, that's accessible. It seems like there'd be educational grants available for that dissemination of information too,
Yeah, I mean, if folks are going through a medical legal situation, I would highly recommend Dr. Pence's L Word. I think she really has done a fantastic job in putting a course together. So you're right, for the trainee level, for the medical student level, I think there's a lot of room for improvement in educational literature and coursework.
Yeah, but you're right. That podcast is a great place to start for sure. We talked a little bit about solutions, and you're right, handling it on the medical side, not necessarily on the legal side, I think is a good start. But were there any other big takeaways from all the conversations you had? I mean, as a medical student, man, you've been exposed by putting this thing together to so much more than anybody. The vast majority of medical students, or even trainees, or even physicians at my level. I just would be curious to know, like, what are your big takeaways? Any solutions that come to mind that maybe they're 10 years down the road, but you're starting to, they're starting to crystallize in your head.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of literature about possible solutions, and there's been a lot of exploration around changing the system. Usually these conversations start around the time that the premiums spike. So we saw that in the 80s, we saw that in the 2000s. I think in the late 80s, they did the Harvard Medical Practice Study. It was published in NEJM, talked about, how those cases that did experience medical error or medical malpractice, they often didn't go to court, they didn't get a settlement, and then the ones that did get a settlement, oftentimes there wasn't any medical malpractice, right? So that's sort of one of the original things. And around that time, we saw a lot of exploration on the state level as to what alternative systems might look like. So we saw tort reform, right? That's a very common one. So this is going to be the caps on economic and non-economic damages. I think it's one of the only proven solutions in terms of reducing premiums, right? Caps on non-economic damages. There's also I'm sorry laws, right? The fact that you can't even express remorse that something bad happened without it being used against you in court really, I think, interferes with the doctor-patient relationship that we know is so important to these sort of cases. So those are things. There's also, various dispute arbitration type models out there. But a lot of times those things get struck down in court because there's a constitutional right to a trial, a jury trial, and it can be seen as interfering with those things. So there's a lot of different solutions out there. And of course, there's these communication resolution programs that we highlight in the film. And the nice thing about those is you don't need a legal change per se for those things to happen. You're not required to change laws. Now, there are going to be laws that will help facilitate those things, but you don't necessarily have to do it. And that's what they did in Michigan, right? And the data, I mean, there's a couple places across the country that have done it. I think Stanford's done it, Michigan's done it, some of the Boston programs have done it as well. And when you look at the literature, basically you see that the costs are stable, which is wild because you think that, all of a sudden I'm inviting all sorts of things to my doorstep, and yet the costs are stable, and I think the number of cases goes down. And so it goes to show that, we can do the right thing, and we can do it in a way that's cost neutral, right? So I think that's one of the reasons why those programs are so promising, and one of the reasons we chose to highlight that. But in terms of overall takeaways from the film, I think fundamentally we found that the system is broken, right? It doesn't work for doctors. We know that. It doesn't work for patients, which is something we try to highlight in the film. Like, yes, Amanda and Megan's family, they did win that case, but they didn't feel, satisfied at the end. You highlight the fact that, like, well, nothing really changed, right? We got our settlement, they paid out, nothing really changed. So it doesn't work for patients. And finally, we want to highlight there's other options out there. And we need to have a conversation. We try not to be super prescriptive in the film. We're trying to be more descriptive than prescriptive and sort of start this conversation in the community about what can we do to really create a safer environment for patients. That's what this is all about.
Yeah. And also just like you also highlight just how important, mental health is for the physician on the physician side to help navigate all of this. And Geet just talked about this, like you said, in her podcast, but also, there's a lot of, obviously it contributes to burnout. Burnout's a whole nother topic. Is not even getting sued, but just the fear of getting sued and that whole defensive medicine, it's not the way you want to practice, right? It's not good for the healthcare system. So those are other key things. Has this sparked ideas for the next film? I mean, do you have like multiple films lined up in your head that you want to get out there at this point?
It's always the filmmaker's dream to look for the next film. One of the things, of course, is resources, right? So a lot of people will come to you and be like, oh, can we do a film about this? And it's like, do you have the resources for us to be able to do it? Because, this was very much a passion project, but we're not putting any food on the table with documentary filmmaking, for sure. But I think things are like, mental health, looking at way things have changed after Roe was taken down by the Supreme Court. Those are all sort of topics that we're looking at. But if folks are interested in a certain topic and would love to reach out and have a conversation about what may or may not be feasible, given your resources, yeah.
And do you guys have have you formed a company around, like a production company around these medical documentaries?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think we have. I mean, we had Dr. Brady took care of a lot of the, as executive producer, of doing the LLC work and making sure we were able to, because you have to get insurance for the documentaries, like errors and omissions insurance that you have to get for the documentary to make sure that, in case someone comes after you for errors and omissions in your film, you have to have yourself covered. So that was a whole process that we had to tackle as well. And those things aren't cheap either. Yeah, so I think there is a production company, but I'm not sort of super familiar with the details.
Yeah. Well, Vic, it's amazing. Like, honestly, I'm super impressed by how well it's done and how much time it sounds like you guys put into it. Because when did you guys release it? Just within the last 6 months?
Yeah, I think it finally broadcast on PBS end of June of this year.
June. And you started during COVID. So
yeah, fall of 2019. Yeah, that was our first interview.
Wow.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun as well, especially if you enjoy the craft of it and getting to meet people and talk to them about their lives, have them really open up. It's really rewarding in that sense. There's a famous saying that film is a mass empathy machine, right? And so we think about data, and obviously, there's a huge role for data in medicine. But when we think about trying to convince policymakers of change or anyone else, a lot of times the anecdotes, the things you learn in clinic, those are the things that really resonate with people. And our hope with the film is to move beyond or sort of provide addition to, things like the IOM report that came out in 2000 that talked about defensive medicine. All of a sudden, you can sort of see yourself in the Barnes. You can see yourself in Megan and Amanda. You can see yourself in the Siemens, and you can sort of see for yourself how the system is broken and why we need to do something about it.
Right. It at least starts the conversation that you can have the data to back it up, or vice versa, where you're right. It just adds that element of empathy that people can relate to move the needle, right? Because if you don't have the personal stories, it's hard for people to relate.
Exactly. So I think I would encourage folks who are interested in documentary filmmaking, especially in medicine. There are so many stories out there that are waiting to be told, and I would strongly encourage you to go out and tell them.
Yeah, and it all doesn't have to be like your stories were very inspiring at the same time. It all doesn't have to be negative stuff highlighting the negativity of medicine. It could be something that's enlightening and encouraging and inspiring, which I think we do need in medicine these days. It's not all
right.
Bad stuff, right?
Certainly.
Well, Vic, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to getting more feedback from people that have watched the show. Christian Amanova, a friend of mine from Columbus, was the one that introduced us. And he's just like, Aaron, because his wife's a physician, my wife's a physician. And, when we get together, we're obviously just talking about doctor stuff. But he was like, man, you got to watch this. It is really good. And it like brought us to tears. And so of course I immediately, from Krishna's recommendation, I immediately watched it and agreed, and then reached out to you. So thank you again for sharing your story, and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, DM us at BackTable Innovation on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. BackTable Innovation is produced and hosted by Brian Hartley,
Aaron Fritz,
Diana Velasquez Pimentel,
and Eric Amaker.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Josh McWhirter,
Aaron Bowles,
Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and PR by Ann Dang.
Administrative support provided by Jim Willie Kennebrew.
Thanks again for listening.
See you again next week.